sun and CO2 to make glucose, the sugar that they use for food. They also put oxygen into the air so we can share, because oxygen is everywhere.
Welcome back. In the last video we talked about food chains, food webs, pyramids of biomass, and pyramids of energy. We're going to do in this video, we're going to cover the next subpoint, which says students will gather information from secondary sources to construct food chains and food webs to illustrate the relationships between members of species in an ecosystem. So for this dot point, what you have to do is you have to find out, okay, first of all, you need to know what kind of animals and plants live in the ecosystem you're talking about. That's your first part, so what kind of animals and plants live there. And the second part is, what kind of general interactions do they have? You know, which one feeds off which one? That's the second part. If you know those two things, then you can build your food chains and your food webs, which is exactly what you do have to do, because it says construct, which means by the end you need to know how to construct a food chain and food web if you have information given. Before we start, I want to go over some of the concepts we mentioned last time, some of the terms. We've got the producer, who is the organism who uses the sun's energy to actually make their own food. We've got the primary producer, primary consumer, which is the one who actually eats producers. We always herbivores, so plant eaters, because producers are mostly plant eaters. And we've got the secondary consumers. And secondary consumers are the ones who eat the actual primary consumers. For example, the primary consumer is a grasshopper, the secondary consumer might be a mouse. And we've got the tertiary consumers who are the ones who eat the secondary consumer. For example, the secondary consumer is a mouse, the tertiary consumer would be a fox, for example. So these are some of the important terms. And now here's the information we've got given. Okay, we know that in our ecosystem, a fox eats a mouse, grasshopper eats the grass, koalas eat eucalyptus leaves, mice eat grasshoppers, frogs eat grasshoppers, and a hawk eats mice. So using that information, we should first, let's just construct a food chain. So remember, a food chain they're quite a simple one. It's a simple version where you just show one type of interaction, not the whole complexity, but just one type of interaction. So for example, okay, we say we've got the sun first, so the sun is where our initial energy comes from, and the sun transfers its energy to a producer. In this case, we can take, okay, grass. Grass is a plant, so grass has to be a producer. So we can write grass. Remember, this actual line means the direction of the arrow means we have energy flowing from the sun to grass. And we should also write that the grass itself is a producer. Now, this says that the actual grasshopper eats the grass. So we know, okay, next is the grass eaten by the grasshopper. And that would make the grasshopper our primary consumer, the first consumer, primary consumer. Most primary consumers are herbivores, such as grasshopper. Or, they could also be omnivores, something that eats both plants and animals. Then the grasshopper is eaten by, let's see, what does this tell us? Grasshopper is eaten by, mice eat grasshopper. So we can say, okay, next level would be the mouse being eaten by, different color. The mouse being eaten by, the grasshopper being eaten by the mouse. So a secondary consumer is our mouse. And do we have any information to who could be the tertiary consumer? Well, here we've got written the fox eats the mice. So a fox could be the tertiary consumer. Tertiary consumer, which means that last part of that whole line is our tertiary consumer, which would be the fox. And then the fox, could be, for example, it could be decomposed. So it could be decomposed by decomposers. So there could still be another one. It doesn't have to not all food chains have a decomposer at the end of it. But you could say decomposer decomposes them, and then the energy and the nutrients themselves are returned, and then the cycle continues. But you also should remember that there's always energy lost. So always 90% of the energy from the grasshopper is lost before it goes to from the grass. 90% of the energy from the grass is lost before it goes to grasshopper. Because the grass has to be able to reproduce and grow, and etc. Same with when the energy goes from the grasshopper to the mouse. Only 10% is transferred, 9% is lost, and that goes on all the way to the end. And that's a food chain. And a food web is similar, but it's more realistic, and it shows all the different types of interactions. So okay, we can say we've got sun as our first part, Now, what does the sun give the energy to? Well, we have the grass, as we did beforehand, so there must be grass in this ecosystem. But we also hear that the koala eats the eucalyptus tree. So there's also a eucalyptus tree somewhere. So there's two different types of producers. Eucalyptus tree. So the energy goes both to the grass and to the eucalyptus tree. The next part is, okay, well, the grasshopper eats the grass. So the grasshopper is eating the grass. And who eats the eucalyptus tree? Leaves, not the eucalyptus tree, but leaves. The koala bear does that. So here, for this, the arrow is pointing the direction of the energy flow. So energy flows from eucalyptus tree to koala. What else do we have? We have mice. We say mice. Mice eats grasshoppers. That's next level. So grasshoppers are being eaten by the mice. And then who eats the mice? The mice are actually being eaten by two things, by both the hawk and the fox. So both the hawk and the fox eat the mouse, or the mice. Fox and the hawk. Is there anything else we missed? Frogs eat the grasshoppers, so the actual grasshoppers are also eaten by the frogs. So they're eaten here by the frogs. So you can see this is a bit more complex than your food chain, but food web is more realistic. Because if you think about it, I mean, the grasshopper might be not just eaten by purely the mouse, but it might also be eaten by the frogs. In the ecosystem, we've got lots of different animals around. So this is a more realistic overview of what's actually happening, whereas the food chain is a good way just to show the individual interactions, and a quite simplified way of doing it. But for this top one, you need to be able to know how to construct both food webs and food chains, especially if you're given certain information. Like this one we were given up there. That should be enough to be able to construct food chains and food webs. I hope that was useful.
Thank you for watching.